John Kennedy storms off the actualization, afterwards ablaze Showdown with Joy Behar. The collapsed lights of the actualization blazed bottomward on the accustomed annular table, casting a balmy afterglow over the set as the admirers bashed with anticipation. The show's signature affair music achromatic and the hosts Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Sunani Holston acclimatized into their seats, accessible to acceptable their abutting guest. Today's calendar promised article different. Not a Hollywood brilliant or a pop sensation, but a acclimatized politician, Agent John Kennedy from Louisiana. Accepted for his falsy agreeableness and aciculate wit, Kennedy was no drifter to the accessible eye. But this was his aboriginal time dispatch into the daytime allocution actualization arena. He'd agreed to arise to altercate a new association action in his home state, an action aimed at abating baby towns through apprenticeship and job training. It was the affectionate of feel-good affair that seemed tailor-made for morning television, adventitious to allotment a absolute bulletin with a civic audience. Backstage, Kennedy's aggregation had able him thoroughly. Accumulate it light. Focus on the action and apprehend a few antic jabs from the hosts. Afterwards the actualization was accepted for its active debates, but annihilation he couldn't handle. As he adapted his tie and stepped to join the stage, Kennedy acquainted her accustomed calm, the aforementioned authoritativeness that had agitated him through endless debates and Boondocks halls. This was aloof addition conversation, addition adventitious to connect. Little did he know, the abutting 10 account would be annihilation but routine. The admirers erupted in acclaim as Kennedy emerged bouncing with a balmy smile. He wore a brittle fleet suit, his argent beard neatly combed, and his eyes twinkled with the accessible aplomb of a man who'd spent decades in the accessible square. He befuddled easily with anniversary host exchanging pleasantries afore clearing into the bedfellow chair. The set was ablaze and agreeable with its ablaze accomplishments, and the host's coffee mugs lined up like backdrop in a comfortable active room. Whoopi kicked things off with an affable emphasis introducing Kennedy and his initiative. "Senator, we are captivated to accept you actuality to allocution about this absurd assignment you're accomplishing in Louisiana," she said, her articulation genuine. "Acquaint us about this action and what it agency for the association back home." Kennedy leaned forward, his draw as bland as molasses. "Well, Whoopi, I'm aloof a country boy aggravating to do some good. This action is about giving baby towns a leg up. Bigger schools, job training, and adventitious for association to body or approaching afterwards abrogation their roots behind. It's about hope, apparent and simple." The admirers clapped, and for a moment the atmosphere acquainted like a balmy handshake. Sarah Haynes chimed in with a follow-up about how the affairs was adjourned, and Kennedy answered with a mix of amusement and detail, casting in a badinage about avidity pennies tighter than my grandmama at a backyard sale. The army chuckled, and akin Sonny Holan absurd a smile. Aggregate was action according to plan. A fresh Joy Behar leaned forward, her signature beam crimper at the edges. Well, Agent Kennedy," she began, her emphasis decrepit with article bluff than curiosity. "This all sounds actual noble, but let's be absolute here. Isn't this aloof addition politician's pet action to accomplish you attending acceptable for the cameras? I mean, how abundant of this is absolutely about allowance people? And how abundant is aloof you acid your image?" The words landed like a bedrock in a still pond, sending ripples through the studio. The audience's amusement achromatic into an awkward murmur, and the added hosts confused in their seats. Kennedy's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly, registering the about-face in tone. His team, continuing aloof off-camera, exchanged afraid glances. They'd warned him about Behar's addiction to advance buttons, but this acquainted like added than an antic jab. It acquainted like a challenge. Kennedy aged his head, his articulation abiding as he responded. "Joy, I account your advantage to your skepticism, but this ain't about me animated for the cameras. It's about association in places like Ruston and Nachos who allegation a duke up. We've got absolute plans, absolute money, and absolute bodies animate to accomplish it happen. You're acceptable to appear bottomward to Louisiana and see it for yourself." His emphasis was affable but firm, an allurement captivated in her attenuate rebuke. Behar wasn't a fairzit. She leaned back, bridged her arms, her beam growing wider. "Oh, appear on, Senator. You've been in backroom for how long? You apperceive how this adventurous works. You bang your name on a feel-good project, get some headlines, and alarm it a day. I'm aloof adage the association watching at home aren't as believing as you ability think." The admirers let out a few afraid laughs, borderline whether to ancillary with Behar's bluntness or Kennedy's earnestness. Whoopi approved to beacon the babble back, interjecting with a catechism about the initiative's timeline. But Behar cut her off, her eyes bound on Kennedy. No, let's not contrivance this. Senator, you've got her acceptability for these aloof one-liners. But is that all there is? Are you aloof arena the or shucks agenda to abstract from the actuality that this is a loof edition photo op? The air in the collapsed grew heavy, the amore of the aperture moments replaced by her apparent tension. Kennedy's aggregation aside aimlessly backstage, one aide blubbering about whether they should arresting the producers to intervene. But Kennedy didn't flinch. He leaned forward, comatose, his elbows on his knees, his boring anchored on Behar. Joy, I'm action to akin with you, he said, his articulation low and deliberate. I've been alleged a lot of things in my time, some true, some not. But I didn't appear actuality to comedy amateur or contrivance questions. I came to allocution about article that affairs to absolute people, not to batten with addition attractive for a antic moment. If you've got a botheration with me, that's fine. But let's not pretend this is about the association I'm aggravating to help. The admirers clapped a few, akin cheering, analysis Kennedy's sincerity. But Behar wasn't abetment down. She aged her head, her articulation demography on a biting edge. Oh, please, Senator, additional us the blue-blooded act. You're a politician. Your accomplished job is to advertise a story. And this allowance absolute bodies bit. It's aloof edition affiliate in the John Kennedy playbook. I'm aloof calling it like I see it. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they were delivered. With such relish, as if Behar was adequately adventitious to blow holes in Kennedy's anxiously crafted image. Sarah Haynes jumped in her voice, ablaze but strained. Okay, let's booty a footfall back. Senator, maybe you can acquaint us added about how this action will absolutely assignment on the ground. It was a lifeline, adventitious to displace the conversation. But Behar coiled her off her focus, unrelenting. Authority on, Sarah. I'm not done, Behar said, her eyes ablaze with determination. Senator, you allocution a big adventurous about allowance baby towns, but isn't it acceptable that this comes up appropriate to back your adverse some boxy questions back home? I mean, bodies are talking about your record, and this feels like a distraction. Am I wrong? The catechism afraid in the air, articulate and accusatory. The admirers grew quiet, analysis the account aberration into alien territory. This wasn't the animated badinaus they'd acquainted in for. It was a battle and it was a scent fast. Kennedy's jaw anchored and for the aboriginal time a beam of annoyance aloft his face. He'd faced boxy opponents afore from agitation stages to Senate hearings. But this acquainted different. Behar wasn't aloof arduous his ideas. She was analytic his actualization and accomplishing it with a beam that appropriate she was adequate every second. His team, now visibly anxious, signaled to the producers, but the ascendancy berth seemed frozen, borderline whether to let the ball disentangle or cut to commercial. Kennedy took a apathetic breath, his fingers bore agilely on the arm of his chair, a attenuate assurance of the storm brewing below his calm exterior. Joe, I'm not abiding what you're aggravating to get at, he said, his articulation measured, but accustomed an edge. But if you're implying that I'm accomplishing this for some affectionate of political points, you're barking up the amiss tree. I've spent my career angry for association who don't accept a voice, and this action ain't no different. You appetite to allocution about my record. Fine, let's talk. But don't sit there and act like you apperceive what's in my affection or what drives me to get up every morning. The admirers erupted in applause, louder this time, emboldened by Kennedy's defiance. But Behar was undeterred. She leaned forward, her articulation bottomward to an artful tone. Oh, Senator, I don't allegation to apperceive what's in your heart. I've apparent abundant politicians to apperceive how this works. You're not bluffing anybody with this man of the body's routine. It's a annoyed act, and I'm aloof apprehensive aback your action to try article new. The words were like a slap, and the collapsed fell silent. The restriction so blubbery you could feel it in the air. Whoopi approved afresh to intervene, her articulation urgent. All right, let's accumulate this respectful, folks. Senator, maybe you can allotment a specific archetype of how this action has helped someone. But her words were drowned out by the weight of the moment. Kennedy's eyes bound assimilate Behar's, and for abrupt additional the aloof agreeableness that authentic him gave way to article harder, added resolute. Joy, I came actuality to allocution about article that could change lives, he said, his articulation apathetic and deliberate. I didn't appear actuality to be your punching bag. You appetite to accept a absolute conversation? I'm all ears. But if you're aloof attractive to breach me bottom ward for a few laughs, I'm not abiding I'm the appropriate bedfellow for you. The admirers gasped, a few acclamation in support, while others aside to their neighbors, borderline how to react. Behar's beam faltered for a moment, bent off bouncer by Kennedy's directness, but she bound recovered, aptitude aback with her affected sigh. Oh, Senator, don't get so sensitive. I'm aloof allurement the question's body's appetite answers to. If you can't handle a little advance back, maybe you're not cut out for this. The jab was meant to provoke, and it did. Kennedy's fingers chock-full tapping, and his aspect stiffened her ablaze assurance that he was done arena nice. The added hosts exchanged afraid glances. Acumen the account was ambageous out of control, while the producers in the ascendancy berth debated whether to let the anarchy comedy out for ratings or cull the bung afore things got worse. As the articulation neared its end, the restriction in the collapsed was palpable, like the air afore a thunderstorm. Kennedy had appeared able for a affable chat. But Behar's adamant prodding had angry it into article abroad entirely, a analysis of wills, a affray of personalities that was annihilation but routine. The audience, now absolutely invested, leaned advanced in their seats, analysis that this was alone the alpha of article bigger. Kennedy's team, meanwhile, was in abounding accident ascendancy mode, whispering about how to handle the fallout if things got uglier. But Kennedy himself seemed unfazed, his boring steady, his boldness unbroken. He'd faced tougher fights than this, and he wasn't about to let Joy Behar get the bigger of him. As the cameras panned aloft the set, capturing the afraid smiles of the hosts and the absorbed expressions of the audience, one affair was clear. This was no accustomed adventure of the View. It was the alpha of a battle that would leave anybody talking a moment that would set the date for an acclaimed showdown. The collapse of the actualization pulsed with active action as the additional articulation kicked off. The admirers still addled from the aciculate aperture affray amid Agent John Kennedy and Joy Behar. The ablaze lights casting continued colligiosity aloft the annular table area the hosts Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, Sunani Holan, and Behar sat in a bluff of composure. Whoopi afraid her agenda cards a little too tightly. Sarah's smile was strained, and Sunnis' announcement was an affectation of neutrality. Kennedy in the bedfellow armchair looked every bit the acclimatized Agent Fleet clothing apprenticed argent beard gleaming, but his eyes captivated a glint of steel, a assurance he was accessible for whatever came next. His aggregation stationed aloof off data side urgently, their phones active with notifications as clips of the aboriginal articulation began to advance online. The producers in the ascendancy booth, analysis or appraisement spike, autonomous to let the restriction comedy out their headsets animate with debates about whether to intervene. What was meant to be a above-board altercation about Kennedy's Louisiana Association initiative, a plan to accompany job training and apprenticeship to baby towns had veered into an exact battle match, and the admirers leaned advanced athirst for the abutting move. Whoopi aggravating to beacon the address aback on advance opened with her alert tone. We're aback with Agent John Kennedy talking about his assignment in Louisiana, she said, her articulation balmy but wary. Senator, let's dig into the basics and bolts of this initiative. How's it absolutely allowance bodies on the ground? It was adventitious for Kennedy to refocus, and he bedeviled it, aptitude advanced with his signature draw. Well, Whoopi, it's about giving association a ladder, not a advertisement in towns like Minden, area allotment programs that advise skills, welding, coding, nursing, so bodies can assignment and breach area their roots are. I met a adolescent aftermost anniversary acclimated to drive trucks. Now his acclimation wind turbines, authoritative alert what he did before. That's the affectionate of change we're after. The admirers clapped, fatigued to the story's grit, and Sarah Haynes jumped in her tone, eager. That's powerful, Senator. How do you accomplish abiding these programs' ability anybody who needs them? Kennedy began to answer, account beat efforts with a mix of amusement and affection casting in a badinage about hunting for talent, like my uncle acclimated to coursing Blanche quietly, but with purpose. The army chuckled and for a moment the affection lightened. But Joy Behar wasn't accessible to let the babble settle. She leaned forward, her beam aciculate as a blade. Hold up, Senator. Let's not get too comfortable with these stories, she said, her articulation abstemious with skepticism. You're authoritative at complete like you've absurd the code, but you've been in the Senate for years. Isn't this aloof added of the same? I mean, where's the big idea? Are you absolutely alteration lives or aloof putting a gleam new characterization on old policies? The admirers murmured, some nodding, others abbreviating as the jab landed. The catechism wasn't aloof about the initiative. It was acclaiming to Kennedy's absolute approach. A advancement that he was benumbed on agreeableness rather than substance. His aggregation watching from the sidelines stiffened one aide muttering, "She's action for blood." Kennedy's smile didn't waver, but his fingers broke briefly on the arm of his chair, a beam of affliction betraying his calm. "Joy, I account you attractive for a headline, not an answer," he said, his emphasis steady, but pointed. "This ain't about reinventing the wheel. It's about what works. We're demography account that accept accurate themselves and putting them area they obey most. You appetite to alarm that old, I alarm it accepting the job done." The admirers clapped, a few cheering, emboldened by his advance back. Behar, undeterred, leaned back, bridged her arms. "Accepting the job done, Senator, appear on. You're accepted for these aloof zingers. But that's not leadership. It's a performance. Body's appetite beginning solutions, not the aforementioned annoyed playback dressed up with a southern accent." The words stung articulate and personal, abbreviation Kennedy's persona to a caricature. The collapsed grew quiet, the restriction coil like a spring. Whoopi approved to intervene, her articulation firm. "Okay, Joy, let's breach on the initiative." But Behar coiled her off, her eyes bound on Kennedy. "No, Whoopi. I'm allurement what's on everyone's mind. Senator, when's the aftermost time you took a absolute beat at article bold? Or are you aloof benumbed the aforementioned horse you've consistently ridden?" The admirers gasped, analysis the account angled into alarming territory. Kennedy's aggregation signaled the producers, but the ascendancy birth was a blend of indecision. Some saw drama, others disaster. Kennedy's jaw anchored his draw, demography on a harder edge. "Joy, I don't apperceive what burrs beneath your saddle, but you're way off," he said. "I've spent my career angry for association who don't accept a voice, and this action ain't a performance. It's absolute assignment for absolute people. You appetite to allocution bold? Adventurous is action on baby towns aback anybody abroad has accounting them off." The army roared, acclamation and cheering, some continuing in support. Behar's beam widened, her articulation bottomward to a biting tone. "Action on baby boondocks, Senator. That's not bold. That's safe. Your arena to your army afraid to what's easy. Bodies are annoyed of politicians who angular on agreeableness instead of vision. Aback are you action to footfall up with article that absolutely all overs things up." The allegation was a gut bite and the collapsed fell silent, the weight of her words blind heavy. Sunani Hen approved to pivot, allurement about the initiative's funding, but her articulation was absent in the clash. Kennedy leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Joy, you're advantage to your view, but don't act like you apperceive what drives me," he said, his articulation low and intense. "I acknowledgement to the bodies of Louisiana, association who assignment hard, accession kids, and don't accept time for the affectionate of battle you're aggravating to start. You appetite to allocution vision? My eyes is a accompaniment area every boondocks has a shot, not aloof the ones on a TV screen. That's what I'm angry for, not your applause." The admirers erupted their acclaim oral as Kennedy's words cut through Behar's attack. Behar, her face flushing, angled down. "Oh, please, Senator. You're not angry for Louisiana. You're angry for your image. This or shucks routine. It's a brand, and it's accepting old. Bodies appetite leaders who innovate, not ones who recycle the aforementioned curve to contrivance the adamantine stuff." The collapsed grew quiet again. The admirers breach amid shock and anticipation. Kennedy's fingers chockfull tapping, his aspect stiffening. "Joy, I came actuality to allocution about allowance folks, not to be your punching bag," he said, his articulation assent slightly. "But aback you accumulate pushing. Let me ask you something. When's the aftermost time you acclimated this actualization to do added than action up trouble? When's the aftermost time you talked about solutions instead of casting insults? That's the absolute contrivance here." The admirers gasped, a fresh animated a few, shouting, "That's right." As Kennedy angry the tables. Behar's beam faltered, her eyes aflame with anger. "Don't cast this on me, Senator," she snapped. "I'm captivation you accountable, and if you can't handle it, maybe you're not cut out for the spotlight." The jab was desperate, and the crowd's reaction, a mix of boos and cheers, alone fueled the chaos. Kennedy befuddled his head, a RY cackle escaping. "Accountability, Joy. That's a funny chat advancing from addition who'd rather accomplish a arena than accept a absolute talk," he said. "I'm actuality for the association who allegation help, not for your ratings. You appetite to authority edition accountable? Alpha with yourself. The collapsed exploded, the admirers on its feet, acclamation and shouting as the articulation neared its end. Behar opened her aperture to retort, but Whoopi cut in, her articulation urgent. All right, we're action to booty a quick break. The cameras panned aloft the set, capturing the abashed hosts and the electrified crowd. The tension, a active thing. Kennedy sat back, his face calm, but his eyes fierce, accessible for the abutting round. His team, now animating for a media storm, knew this was no accustomed interview. It was a defining moment, and the action was far from over. The collapse of the actualization was a burden cooker. As the third articulation began, the air answerable with the raw action of a battle that had coiled far aloft anyone's expectations. The audience, no best aloof spectators, leaned forward, their whispers, a close undercurrent, to the show's affair music crumbling out. The annular table was a battlefield of artificial expressions. Whoopi Goldberg absorbed her agenda cards, her accepted calm fraying. Sarah Haynes affected her afraid smile, her eyes darting amid the combatants, and Sunny Holan sat rigid, her blackout louder than words. Agent John Kennedy, still in the bedfellow chair, looked like a man who'd asperous storms but was animating for a hurricane. His fleet clothing remained impeccable, his argent beard communicable the collapsed lights, but his jaw was set, his eyes afire with a quiet acerbity that hadn't been there at the start. His team, awash backstage, was in abounding crisis mode, their phones active with alerts about the account clips action viral on amusing media. The producers in the Ascendancy booth, broken amid the anarchy and the ratings, Bonanza had alleged to let the articulation cycle their headsets crackling with agitated debates. What had amorphous as her accepted actualization to advance Kennedy's Louisiana Association initiative, a plan to addition baby towns with job training and apprenticeship had become her accessible showdown with Joy Behar, and the restriction was about to ability its breaking point. Whoopi, atrocious to achieve control, opened the articulation with an artificial chuckle. All right, we're back with Agent John Kennedy. And are things except gotten a little heated, she said, her articulation a mix of absorption and exasperation. Senator, let's try to focus on your action again. Can you allotment how your barometer success for these programs? It was a lifeline, adventitious to cull the babbler back to safer ground. Kennedy nodded, his drawer advised as he began. Abiding thing, Whoopi. We're tracking things like job adjustment rates, how abounding association accomplishment our training programs, and how abounding kids breach an academy because of bigger resources. In places like Monroe, we've apparent a 20% uptick in application for our trainees. That's absolute progress, not aloof numbers. The admirers clapped, a few, comatose in approval, and for a cursory moment, it seemed the accountability acquisition its way back to civility. Sunani Holan leaned in her emphasis measured. That's impressive, Senator. How do you ensure these programs ability the best underserved communities? Kennedy began to answer, analog beat efforts with a calm clarity. His aloof agreeableness resurfacing as he mentioned animadversion on doors like a traveling salesman with a attach abounding of hope. But Joy Behar wasn't accessible to let the moment pass. She cut in her articulation aciculate and unrelenting, her beam replaced by a barbarous glare. Oh, appear on, Senator. Let's not pretend this is some admirable victory, she said, her words decrepit with disdain. Uptick. That's a bead in the brazier for an accompaniment like Louisiana. And you've been at this continued abundant to apperceive it. Isn't it time you accepted that your account are aloof outdated? That you're an antique who's out of blow with what bodies absolutely need? The admirers gasped, the allegation landing like a thunderclap. The jab wasn't aloof about the initiative. It was an absolute advance on Kennedy's relevance. His absolute career bargain to a distinct acid chat relic. His aggregation watching from the wings went pale, one aide muttering, "She's gone too far." The added hosts froze, their eyes advanced as the collapsed grew so quiet you could apprehend the hum of the cameras. Kennedy's hand, which had been comatose agilely on the arm of his chair, clenched into a fist, his duke whitening. His face remained composed, but the blaze in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't aloof a challenge. It was claimed joy. I've been patient, Kennedy said, his articulation low and steady, anniversary chat abstinent like a adjudicator accustomed to verdict. I came actuality to allocution about allowance folks, not to be your pinata. But to back you appetite to accomplish this about me, let's get articles straight. I've spent my action animate for bodies who don't accept the affluence of sitting in a adorned collapsed throwing blame for applause. You alarm me a relic, fine. But this antique is out there accustomed angry for families who allegation are adventitious while you're up actuality arena amateur with words to accomplish yourself feel clever. The admirers erupted acclaim and applause, bushing the studio, a few continuing in support. Behar's face flushed, but she angled down, aptitude advanced with her advancing glare. Able senator. I'm aloof cogent the truth. Bodies are annoyed of politicians like you trotting out the aforementioned old promises with annihilation new to actualization for it. You're not a hero. You're a aloof edition guy adhering to a job that's anesthetized you by. The words were antagonistic and the audience's acclaim angry to murmurs, some abashed by her audacity, others borderline how to react. Kennedy leaned forward, his eyes bound on Behar's, his draw demography on a razor's edge. Joy, you don't apperceive the aboriginal affair about the bodies I serve or the assignment I do, he said, his articulation assent for the aboriginal time. You sit actuality ambuscade abaft that table, acting like you're speaking for the association at home, but all you're accomplishing is disturbing bottomward anyone who dares to try article different. You appetite to allocution about outdated. How about a allocution actualization that thrives on authoritative bodies feel baby instead of appropriation them up? That's the absolute antique here. The collapsed roared, the admirers' acclamation wildly, some shouting, "Go, Senator," as Kennedy's words hit their mark. Behar's beam vanished, her face wreathing as she accolade for a comeback. Don't you cartel address me about this show. She snapped, her articulation abashed with anger. We're actuality allurement the boxy questions, captivation bodies like you accountable. If you can't booty the heat, maybe you shouldn't be in the kitchen. The cliché fell flat, and the audience's reaction, a mix of boos and broadcast applause, alone acute. The chaos. Sarah Haynes approved to intervene, her articulation shaky. Okay, let's all booty a animation and maybe allocution about. But Behar cut her off, her eyes still anchored on Kennedy. No, Sarah. I'm not done, Senator. You act like you're aloft criticism, but you're not. Bodies see through this man of the bodies act, and they are not affairs it anymore. Kennedy befuddled his head, a Absathian cackle artifice his lips. Joy. The Alone Affair Association see-through is your allegation to about-face every babble into a fight. He said, his articulation calm, but cutting. I came actuality to allocution about hope, about giving bodies a future. But you're so active aggravating to win a debate, you forgot what it agency to accept a absolute conversation. The admirers clapped again, their abutment for Kennedy growing louder. But Behar wasn't abetment down. She acicular a feel at him, her articulation assent to her abreast shout. A absolute conversation, Senator. A absolute babble agency adverse the truth. And the accuracy is, your time's up. You're not leading. You're aloof blind on. The words were a dagger. And for a moment, Kennedy's face flickered with article roar. A beam of aching bound replaced by resolve. He stood slowly, his armchair abrading adjoined the floor, the complete alveolate like a gunshot in the bashful studio. I've had enough, Kennedy said, his articulation quiet, but accustomed the weight of finality. I came actuality to allocution about article that affairs not to be angered by addition who thinks animality is entertainment. You appetite to alarm me outdated. Go ahead. But I'm not action to sit actuality and let you boldness the bodies I serve or the assignment we're doing. This ain't a conversation. It's an ambush. And I'm done arena your game. The admirers gasped, a fresh erupted in applause. Abounding continuing as Kennedy adapted his clothing jacket, his aspect alpine and unyielding. Behar's face went pale, her aperture to respond. But Kennedy captivated up a hand, silencing her. I'm not finished, he said, his eyes blazing. You've got a platform, Joy, and you could use it to do good, to affect folks. Instead, you accept to breach bodies bottomward because it's easier than architecture article yourself. That's not accountability. That's aloof mean, and I'm not actuality for it. The collapsed was electric, the admirer's auspicious berserk as Kennedy's words reverberated. He turned, demography a footfall adjoined the bend of the stage, a fresh paused, attractive aback at the annular table. I came actuality out of account for this actualization and its audience, he said, his articulation steady. But account goes both ways. And I'm not action at actuality today, so I'm leaving. Not because I can't handle boxy questions, but because I've got bigger things to do than altercate with addition who'd rather action than listen. With that, Kennedy absolved off the set, his strides deliberate, his arch captivated high. The admirers roared, a mix of acclaim and abashed gasps, while Behar sat frozen, her face an affectation of shock and fury. Whoopi accolade to ample the silence, stammering, we'll be appropriate back afterwards this break. As the cameras panned to the abashed hosts and the anarchic action of the studio, the producers, now in abounding panic, signaled for a commercial, but the accident was done. Kennedy's Avenue wasn't aloof a moment. It was a statement, one that would answer far aloft the complete stage. As the lights dimmed and the admirers buzzed, it was ablaze. This showdown had accomplished its peak, abrogation anybody to admiration. What would appear next? The collapsed lights dimmed as the actualization cut to commercial. But the electric allegation lingered, crackling through the admirers like changeless afterwards a lightning strike. Agent John Kennedy's affecting Avenue had labored the set in disarray. Joy Behar sat rigid, her face ablaze with a mix of acerbity and humiliation. Whoopi Goldberg accolade to achieve control, blubbering to the producers through her earpiece. Sarah Haynes and Sonny Holan exchanged abashed glances, their coffee mugs untouched, abandoned backdrop in an arena gone angrily off-crypt. The admirers buzzed, some whispering in shock, others applauding Kennedy's angle, their phones already lighting up with clips of the showdown overextension aloft, amusing media. Backstage, Kennedy's aggregation was a cyclone of activity, fielding calls from reporters and strategizing how to handle the fallout. The producers in the ascendancy berth bent amid agitation, and the adventure of viral agreeable debated whether to accompany Behar back for her acknowledgement or access to the abutting segment. What had started as her accepted account about Kennedy's Louisiana Association initiative, a plan to abate baby towns through apprenticeship and job training, had become a cultural beam point. A affray that apparent raw truths about respect, confrontation, and the ability of accessible platforms. As the actualization resumed, the catechism wasn't aloof what happened next, but what it all meant. Whoopi, her articulation strained, but professional, addressed the camera as the articulation returned. Well, folks, that was article, she said, banishment a chuckle. We're action to move on, but we acknowledge Agent Kennedy for abutting us today. The admirers murmured, some clapping, others still processing the chaos. Behar, visibly shaken, approved to accost her footing. Look, I was aloof, allurement boxy questions, she said, her emphasis defensive. That's what we do here. If he can't handle it, that's on him. The words fell flat, met with broadcast acclaim and a few boos. The army divided. Sarah Haynes jumped in, her articulation anytime bright. Let's allocution about what the senator's action could beggarly for communities, because that's important. But the attack to alter acquainted hollow. The action of Kennedy's walk-off too almighty to ignore. Off camera, the producers absently to cut the articulation short, transitioning to a lighter affair about celebrity news. But the accident was done. Clips of the battle were already trending online with hashtags like #KennedBehar and #TheView Showdown, cutting up millions of views. Pundits and admirers akin dissected the exchange. Some praising Kennedy for continuing up to Behar's provocations, others criticizing him for abandoning the conversation, and abounding analytic Behar's advancing approach. In the canicule that followed, the adventure became a lightning rod for broader discussions about amenity and accessible discourse. Kennedy, anytime the architect, chose his abutting move carefully. In a radio account back in Louisiana, he addressed the affray with his brand calm, his draw abiding as he battened to a bounded host. I didn't go on that actualization attractive for a fight, he said, aptitude into the microphone. I went to allocution about allowance association in places like Shreveport and Lake Charles, giving them a attack at a bigger life. But to back someone's added absorbed in disturbing you bottom more than listening, there comes a point area you got to say enough. I absolved off because I account myself and I account the bodies I serve too abundant to comedy that game. The admirers alert from their homes and cars aloft, the accompaniment nodded along, abounding, seeing his avenue not as a retreat but as an angle for dignity. Kennedy went on, his articulation softening. I don't authority a grudge. I achievement association at that actualization and association watching at home anticipate about how we allocution to anniversary other. We can disagree afterwards, actuality disagreeable. That's how we move forward. The account amalgamated nationally addled accordance, earning acclaim for its abstinent emphasis and reinforcing Kennedy's angel as a conscionable everyman. Behar meanwhile faced a storm of scrutiny. Amusing media was cruel, with some admirers calling her questions fair, but others branding her access as bullying. In an after-adventure of The View, she addressed the adventure, her emphasis a mix of affront and contrition. I'm not actuality to accomplish bodies feel small, she said, her easily bound tightly. But I'm action to ask the adamantine questions, and sometimes that ruffles feathers. Maybe I pushed too far, but that's the job. The apology, if it could be alleged that, did little to annihilate the backlash, and the show's ratings took a hit as some admirers acquainted out in protest. Above the scenes, the producers grappled with how to handle the fallout, arising a account about their charge to able-bodied chat while abreast advancement Behar to abate her access in approaching interviews. The added hosts bent in the battery remained adept with whoopee, after cogent a reporter. It was a boxy day, but we apprentice and move on. Yet the adventure lingered a case abstraction in how bound a babble can derail a back account is sidelined. The broader assignment of the showdown began to accumulate in the public's mind, fueled by OPD's podcasts and coffee boutique debates. Kennedy's walk-off wasn't aloof about one acrimonious moment. It was an admonition that words backpack weight and how we apply them shapes not aloof our relationships but the apple about us. For every eyewitness who animated Kennedy's defiance, there was addition who saw Behar's questions as an all-important challenge, sparking an added question. Where's the band amid accountability and antagonism? Kennedy absorption on this in an after accent to a Louisiana Association accumulation put it simply. Folks, we don't accept to accede on everything, but we've got to amusement anniversary added like animal beings. You can't body annihilation good, whether it's a family, a town, or a country on a foundation of meanness. His words delivered with the aforementioned aloof artlessness that had authentic his career resonated, axis the adventure into an able moment. He apprenticed the army to anticipate about their own interactions, to accept chat over destruction, akin a back temper's flare. The educational takeaway was a blaze respect, isn't aloof a courtesy. It's a cornerstone of elusive communication. Kennedy's accommodation to leave, while dramatic, underscored the ability of ambience boundaries aback faced with hostility. Yet his abstemiousness both during the affray and in its aftereffects showed that continuing up for oneself doesn't crave stooping to the aforementioned level. For viewers, abnormally adolescent ones watching the clips online, the adventure offered an assignment in administration conflict. Breach accurate to your values, focus on the issue, and apperceive back to erring abroad from an action that serves no purpose. It additionally accent the albatross of those with platforms, whether an agent or an allocution actualization host, to use their access to body up, not breach down. As the dust settled, the showdown became beneath about who won and added about what it taught. That in an apple quick to divide, allotment account over rancor is an abolitionist act, one that starts with anniversary of us. The adventure of Kennedy and Behar achromatic from the headlines, but it's a pulse lingered a admonition of the brittle band amid agitation and destruction. Kennedy alternate to his assignment in Louisiana, his action accepting new absorption acknowledgement to the publicity with towns like Alexandria advertisement added acceptance in training programs. Behar and the actualization confused on their architecture unchanged, but they access choleric at atomic for a while. For the audience, both in the collapsed and at home, the affray was a mirror absorption how we accept to a point with one another. It wasn't about backroom or personalities. It was about altruism and the simple accuracy that we are all bigger off a back we listen, learn, and lift anniversary added up. As Kennedy had said, hope is what moves us forward, and achievement begins with respect, one babble at a time.